morning. So, plastic, miracle material, environmental scourge, maybe both. What's undeniable is that it's changed our lives, and in many ways for the better. But it's also created a pollution problem at an almost unimaginable scale. It's a problem that's visible, we know it's harmful, it's global, but it's also solvable. So this map conveys a lot of information. The first big picture is we have one global ocean whose currents can transport marine debris around the world. Today, we're finding plastics everywhere from the Arctic to the Antarctic and from the surface to the seafloor. 40% of the plastic that we use today, we use just one time and then it's tossed. And that path from purchase to use to disposal, there's a lot of opportunity for waste to get lost into the environment. Today, about 9 million tons of plastic are hitting the oceans every single year. That's a huge number. It's roughly the equivalent of 5 plastic grocery bags full of plastic trash for every 1 foot of coastline. That's still hard to conceptualize. So imagine 5 plastic grocery bags of plastic full of trash sitting on your lap right now. And if you look to your right and your left, your neighbors have the same piles on their laps. And now imagine that string of people extended around the coastlines of the world. That's a lot of trash getting into our ocean. It's a mess. So one question is, how did we even get into this situation in the first place? So think back to the mid-1800s and try and imagine some of our daily objects that we use, but without plastic. Combs, trinkets, piano keys, billiard balls. Not only were they not made of plastic, but in many cases, they were made of things like elephant ivory, which was wildly expensive and also, as you can imagine, a conservation nightmare. So a billiards company who wanted to attract more people to the game offered a reward of $10,000 to anyone who could come up with a great alternative. And the solution was celluloid, an early plastic derived from plants. So then fast forward just a couple of decades, and we figured out how to make plastic from petroleum. And it was that technology leap that opened up an almost limitless world of possibility of things that could be produced from plastic. And some of these things were incredible. We've revolutionized medicine. We've drastically improved food safety. We've lightened our cars and our airplanes. And we've been able to innovate with life-saving technologies, even simple things like helmets and airbags. So maybe, it's not plastic that is inherently bad. Maybe it's what we're doing with it. So from billiard balls to disposability, a lot happened in just half a century. In 1955, Life magazine pictured an American family celebrating the dawn of throwaway living. Disposable plastics would free the modern housewife from the burden of household chores. Sounds pretty good. And it was a mixed blessing, as we all know. Those single-use plastics pictured here, they sure have made our lives really convenient. But they're also making up a bulk of the waste that's getting lost out into the environment today. So where are we today? From the 50s to now, we've produced about 8 billion metric tons of plastic. And the really incredible part is that it's just in the last 15 years that half of that has been produced. And at the rate we're going, we're set to hit 34 billion tons by 2050. Where's it all going? So the biggest market for plastics today is packaging materials. These items have a use time on average of less than 6 months, and often much less. Packaging materials are also the same items that are more than half of the waste of plastic that we're producing today, whether it's disposed of correctly or not. So we have massive increases over time, but the other question is, where is it being produced? So today, about half of the production is happening in Asia, and China alone represents 29% of all plastics production. If we think about a lot of plastic in the world, and we know now some of it's doing amazing work for us, what's the problem? Well, one of the biggest challenges we have with plastics is its lightweight. It allows the problematic plastics like films and bags to be carried in the water and on the wind and end up where it doesn't belong. But there's a trick to that, because its lightweight is also what makes it so incredible. So picture thousands of glass bottles being carted around by truck or by airplane. And now imagine that same number of bottles made of plastic. There's a wild weight difference between the weight of the glass bottles and the weight of the plastic bottles. And when it comes to transportation, that weight difference is the difference in carbon emissions. So in a world where we have to be considering our impact on climate, what are we supposed to do with that? The bottom line is that it's just not as simple as saying, hey, let's go back to where we were. Let's just go back to glass bottles because it worked and it was better and there wasn't a problem. We have to be thinking about the whole picture of all the materials we used: glass, plastic, aluminum, you name it. From its very early moments when it's coming out of the ground as a raw material, all the way to end of life. What are the impacts at every single stage of this cycle? And that can help us start to think about what the most appropriate material for the job might be. So the problem, really, is that plastics are ending up where they don't belong, out in the environment and in the ocean. And once they're in the ocean, they break down to smaller and smaller in pieces, but they never go away. We just create microplastics and nanoplastics that then can enter our food chain. And that's a really scary thought. The other downside is that once they're in the ocean, they're awfully difficult to recover. Just try and imagine going out to the far reaches in the middle of the Pacific and trying to collect every last small fragment of plastic. It's really not the place to start. So let's get back to maps. National Geographic, after all, loves maps. So we talked about the where of production and how much production, but what about the where of waste? So as Jim mentioned earlier, in 2010, there was a report that told us that about 60% of all mismanaged waste is coming from just 5 countries in Asia: China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka. And it's obvious, looking at this kind of a map, that coastal cities have a huge role to play in the waste that's getting out into the ocean. But what we're now also starting to understand is the role that rivers play as conduits of land-based waste out to the sea. And in that vein, we've learned that just 10 rivers in the world represent 90% of riverborne pollution to the ocean. And guess where those rivers are? 8 out of 10 of them are in Asia. So before you think, well, that's Asia's problem, Jim, also, as you all know in this room, our waste has been going to Asia for processing. The waste of Europe has been going to Asia for processing. So it's all of us that are contributing to this giant pile that's heading out into the sea. So how do we deal with waste? Well, I suspect that many of you, like me, live in a place where you bag up your household trash, you separate out your recyclables, and you leave it out on the curb for waste management to pick up. And if all things go well, your recyclables end up in a picture of efficiency, like this one, and things are getting correctly processed. But unfortunately, this great picture of efficiency isn't what's happening in most of the world. In most of the world, this is a more accurate reflection of what's going on. In places where garbage collection systems do exist, they're chaotic. In Manila alone, there are 17 different government entities involved in garbage collection. That's highly inefficient. And take that and exacerbate the problem with declining landfill space and little to no formal recycling. The informal recycling sector, which is what you're seeing here, it's thousands of waste pickers, is picking up a lot of the slack. But when it comes to informal recycling, value matters. Plastics with little to no value, or plastics that can't be recycled at all, are not going to ever get collected. They're going to be left in the street, and they're going to left to be clogging our waterways. So, I suspect I've depressed you enough. It's a huge problem. It's growing really, really fast. So, let's start talking about how we actually can solve this problem. First and foremost, we have to prevent plastics from getting out into the ocean in the first place. And this should make sense, right? If you're in a boat that's sinking, you're not going to bail it out day after day after day. You've got to find the hole and plug it. Otherwise, you're going to sink at some point. So the same thing holds true for plastics. If we don't stop the flow of waste to the ocean, we'll sink. Just focusing on cleaning and not focusing on prevention will be cleaning until the end of time. So if we consider that the last place to get to plastics is before they reach the ocean, then you can work backwards through the value chain and start to identify all the points of intervention where we can take action to ensure that zero waste actually makes it out to the ocean. And there's opportunity for creativity and innovation at each stage in this value chain. But I want to focus on two areas in particular where there's been a lot of activity, and more importantly, where a lot more action needs to happen. And that's on materials design and waste management. So, starting with materials design, this is the sexy topic, right? The media loves to cover design issues. It's tech forward, and who doesn't want to hear about the cool new water bottle made of algae and all the new products that can be made from bamboo? It definitely captures the public's imagination. And for the general consumer on the street, anywhere in the world, they're saying, why can't it all just be biodegradable? Why can't it all just be compostable? And it's just a little bit more confusing than that. So when it comes to biodegradability, today, most of what we might consider biodegradable plastic is really just breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces. But it's not actually environmentally benign. At the end, we're getting down to those microplastics and nanoplastics again. Now, true biodegradability is possible, and it's happening. These products are being produced. They're just not yet at the scale where we're able to take it out to a large market. And the other issue on biodegradable products is obviously they're not going to be relevant to all plastics applications. But it is really important to think about what are those really bad items that you just can't keep out of the environment no matter how hard you try. The thin films, the plastic bags. Maybe those are the things to focus on for biodegradable. So if biodegradable is not going to be the future, what about compostable? We are using a lot of compostable plastics today already, and it's a great option moving forward. Again, not necessarily applicable to everything, but for a lot of single-use plastics, it sure is. The trick with compostable is most consumers who hear the word compost think, cool, I can take this plastic cup and throw it in with my food scraps in the hole in my backyard. It doesn't really work that way. For plastics, composting has to happen under really specific conditions, super high heat, so you need industrial composting facilities. So at the end of the day, this design issue is still a waste management issue. They have to be tied together. If we're going to lean in this way, we're going to still have to collect those plastics. We're still going to have to sort them out from the rest of recycling and get them to the proper facility where they can be processed. So the chemical side of this is pretty interesting, and there's a lot of investment in R&D happening in this space. But there are more simple solutions when it comes to design that we can do today. Really small actions, things like considering the glues that we use that hold a wrapper around a bottle, or the colors that we use. Minor changes can increase the recyclability of products. Also, my poster child for a terrible product right now is the granola bar wrapper, the energy bar wrapper. In most cases, these are made of many different kinds of materials, all layered together. And once you layer a bunch of different materials together, what are you going to do with it? It's nearly impossible to do anything with other than landfill. So can we focus on reducing the number of materials that go into some of these packaging products? And also, can we bring together the companies who are producing consumer products and get them to agree on a fewer set of options? Once we have a limited number of options, it's a lot easier to invest in the correct infrastructure to deal with the waste of what those could be. So, moving away from the cool chemistry, this is where rapid investment has to happen now. There's opportunities for investment at all stages when it comes to waste management, from the moment of collection to capturing and sorting to how are we containing and processing this waste. Now, it seems at first blush this is the role of governments, right? Governments have to decide what infrastructure they need for their area, they have to find the funding for it, and they've got to actually build the infrastructure. But there's a role for industry here too. And there's a highly encouraging trend with companies taking longer-term responsibility for their products. The concept of producer responsibility has been around for a long time, but on the voluntary side, companies are starting to step up to the plate on this. So the concept is simple. If you put a product out into the world, you share the responsibility of dealing with it through its whole life cycle. It's not just when the consumer buys the product that you're done. You have to think about what's happening to it. And so one example from last year of a company stepping up was Coca-Cola. And it was a big commitment. They said for every bottle that they put out into the world to consumers, they'll collect one from the environment. That's 128 billion bottles a year that Coca-Cola is putting out into the world. There isn't a possibility today to recover that much, which means they have to invest in infrastructure and in collection. Another great example are all the companies that are signing on to transition their products to being 100% reusable, recyclable, or compostable as soon as 2025. And a really encouraging one just came from a few weeks ago. A number of companies from across the supply chain have banded together to form what they're calling the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And this group of companies has already committed over $1 billion. And a big part of that will go to waste management infrastructure as well as education and cleanup. I think you might hear a little bit more about that later. So industry has a lot of opportunity to engage. And that's all industry, whether or not you're a producer of plastic. Governments clearly have a role to play, but what about civil society? What about National Geographic? Where do we fit into this conversation? So as Jim mentioned last year, we published our June issue of the magazine with plastics as our cover story, and the bulk of the magazine dedicated to covering the issue of plastics. It's been incredible to see how momentum has built over time. For decades, this has been a blip on the radar of public attention, slowly growing, but mostly in niche circles, in the conservation community, a little bit in industry circles, but pretty low level. And then all of a sudden, really just in the last 12 to 18 months, there's been an awakening. And our magazine has helped to broaden the audiences that are paying attention to this. So our 1.1 billion content views, we recognize that's not 1 billion people, but it's incredible to get this kind of numbers. This means people are coming back. They're not reading a story and saying, oh, it's a huge problem, I can't deal with this. They're coming back again and again and again. And we're seeing this global awakening, and consumers are starting to say, what can I do? How am I part of this solution? What can I ask of my governments? So at the same time that we launched that issue, we also kicked off a multi-year program of work that straddles both our nonprofit activities and our for-profit media activities. So for the coming years, we're going to be investing heavily in science. We'll continue to tell great solution-focused stories that help to amplify and contextualize the issue of plastics. We want to awaken and mobilize consumers. We want to give them real engagement opportunities and ways that they can contribute to change. And we want to leverage our brand. We know that we have big brand power, so how can we use that to bring governments together, to bring companies together, to move some of these commitments faster, and to help identify the change makers that have the ability to implement systemic change. First and foremost, though, we had to look in the mirror and say, you know, if we're going to go out and tell the world they have to change, we better know how much we're contributing as a company. So we also kicked off an audit that's extremely comprehensive, again, across both sides of our company and going all the way through all of our third-party suppliers. And our intention is to take that information to immediately eliminate the most wasteful plastics in our own supply chains and make a plan to find substitutes and reduce where we can, and make sure that we're transitioning to reusables and recyclables where we can't get rid of it altogether. And it's a really great first step for any company who's trying to understand how to start on their own journey in this space. So for our nonprofit side, our big push now is in science, and in particular, in better understanding the role that rivers play in this problem. There's a lot of unanswered questions, even though we do know now that they're playing a significant role in moving plastics from land to sea, but how are they doing that? How much really is plastic moving off the land through rivers into the ocean? Where is it entering that system? Starting later this year, we're going to kick off the first of a series of source-to-sea river expeditions that will help us understand the flow of plastic, the composition of plastic, the load of plastic going through a river system. It's an incredibly unique opportunity to take a holistic view of a watershed from land through the waterway and out to the ocean. And our goal is to provide actionable information for local and national governments, for companies, for the public, to be able to implement innovative solutions in the places where they're going to matter most and make the biggest change. For the last year, we have already started a grants program to prevent marine plastic pollution. We're investing in piloting solutions, and we're also investing in innovative storytelling and education. And we are leveraging our history and in-classroom education by bringing plastics into the curriculum and empowering students to be part of solution generation. If we don't engage kids, we're still going to have trouble in the future. There is a public awareness and behavior change component of this, because if the trash never makes it to the bin, how does it get collected? So we have to help close that gap. The media side of our company is seeing this, that it's not a one-hit wonder. It's not a one-and-done magazine. We have a long-term commitment to continue to tell the story and to engage consumers. And when we put out the magazine, at the same time, we launched a challenge. We asked consumers to take a pledge to reduce daily plastics in their own lives. And while we recognize that skipping a straw or skipping a coffee cup lid doesn't solve the plastic problem, it creates active awareness. If suddenly you look at your straw and think, wait, what does happen to this when I'm done using it? How does it end up getting eaten by a turtle? You can't help but consider all the other materials that you're using in your life and start to think, well, I guess I don't really need that this time. And you also start to think, wait, if my plastic that I threw into the garbage bin is actually making it to the ocean, there's a problem. I'm going to talk to my government about that. I want to see some action. So it takes everybody. So yeah, right now, it looks pretty apocalyptic. There's a lot of waste. It's all over the place. Production's growing, consumption's growing, populations are growing, but also action is growing from all sectors of society, and there's room for innovation from everyone. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a student, if you're a logistics expert, there's a way to contribute to solving this problem. Because I don't know about you, but when I go to the beach, I'd like to see a lot more turtles than trash. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Valerie. That was really incredible. And you know what struck me is just the power of the imagery to galvanize really the world, because that's what you and your organization has done. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
If you don't mind, if you can stay with me here for a moment, and I'm going to invite Jim up onto the stage. I want to share with you a little bit, while Jim's coming up, some work we've been doing at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. When we became title sponsor early on, one of the things that we like to do is engage directly with our communities. And we worked with the city of Scottsdale. And as you can imagine, we learned, oh, I forgot, I was supposed to move over here. Failed. We worked with the city of Scottsdale, and one of the things that we learned pretty quickly, and it should have been obvious, we're in the desert and water is a big issue. And so we worked with our operations team to look at the water that we produce within the tournament, so the water that we produce in cooking and cleaning, and we decided to reuse that in our portalets. And from there, we engaged in a partnership. In 2011, we worked with an organization called Change the Course. And coincidentally, the National Geographic Society is a strong member of Change the Course. And we continue to look for ways for us to reduce water use at the tournament and in all of our operations. So I'll turn it over to Jim.
Great, thank you.
Can you move it up, please?
I didn't memorize this one, so I'm There we go. Perfect. I did memorize the thanks Tara and Valerie piece.
Very good. Very good. Nice work.
And our partners at Change the Course, and all of you for being here today. Thank you very much. It's partnerships like these that make such a big difference. I have to tell you, I was so impressed with this. It was fantastic, Valerie. Thank you. We should give her another round of applause. It did reinforce how poor of a photographer I am.
I am too, don't worry.
So anyway.
Can you go back, please?
I have to go back just for a second, sorry. So this year, we want to expand our support of the National Geographic Society. I'm very happy to announce that on behalf of Waste Management, we'd like to commit $100,000 to support the education programs around the community.
Thank you.
Right, you bet.
Thank you very much.